to finish the where now position, I think all the conditions are rotten ripe for a new Workers' Party in this country. If you look at things like Royal Mail privatisation at the moment, Labour's promoted it, the Tories in February put a motion down in Parliament to support it, the Liberal Democrats are all in favour of it completely as well. We need a new party, but needing one and achieving one, building one, are two different things. We certainly need, on housing, on employment, on public ownership, we need a socialist message to come out for working people. Now I think, and Gary will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the RMT does not feel as if one union is capable of planting that flag solely to say we are now setting up a new Workers' Party. So anybody who's coming in to say it's the job of the RMT with their 80,000 members to do it, I don't think that's going to be achieved. But I think Brian could pull a few people with him from the POEU after what I've heard this morning. The PCS are looking to all their hundreds of thousands of members about supporting trade union candidates. There are other unions like the FBU and other non-affiliated unions to Labour. I think we have to spend some time over the next 2 months in the run-up to the 2EU conference in trying to influence. So I said this morning, I've written to every one of the 151 trades councils. I've brought some spare copies of the letter. There's roughly 2 or 3 copies for everybody in the room. Please take one away, take it to a stewards committee, take it to a union branch, take it to somewhere. The central point of this letter is to say, have a discussion for working class activists in your area about the need for a political alternative. Start the ball rolling with the discussion. So please take those away before you leave. In practical terms, we met briefly to look at the results a week or so ago. We're due to meet in the 3rd week of July, after the conference this coming week of the RMT and after the Communist Party of Britain has had its executive meeting on the, I think, 11th and 12th of July. We think that out of that meeting in 3 weeks' time, there will be firstly monthly meetings of the existing component parts of the coalition, hopefully organising a convention around the time of the TUC in the early autumn to bring wider forces together, precisely the points that Gary has made about the earlier you start, the better chance you have of impacting on people's consciousness. Now that's agreed, as I say, by the RMT as well, because what I've done on the back of this letter is I've reproduced a statement from Bob Crow, which calls for urgent discussions involving socialist organisations, campaigns and trade unions to build a concerted response to the election of 2 BNP MEPs, and goes on to talk about the collapse of the public support for 3 main parties, each of which is pro-business, pro-EU and supportive of anti-trade union laws. And the conclusion of all that is that we do need something new building in the immediate future. The last point I'll make, Chair, is that this is going on whether or not we take the initiatives, and I agree with Gary that we had this level of interest and involvement 1 year ago rather than just starting it in March. We could have done even far better than we did, but it is starting to take place. All right, it's episodic, it's little things. But in Kidderminster, in the last 4 or 5 years, they've been fighting on the issue of health and a private financed hospital. They ended up with councillors on the council and getting Dr. Richard Taylor elected as an MP. Up in Barrow-in-Furness, they've got councillors elected against the establishment of a private financed academy school. In Tamworth, they stood candidates on the same basis in this local elections. In Wigan, the Community Action Party have got people elected. In Oxford, they've got working class individuals elected. Dotted around the country, there are individual expressions. It doesn't yet have an umbrella to tie it together so that people in the rest of the country realise that's all part of the same battle that's taking place. In the Socialist Party, we've got councillors in Lewisham, in Coventry and in Huddersfield. There are these points of support being established, but we need to generalise it, make it much wider so people see it's viable and it's national. I'll finish with this last point. There is a vacuum being created in politics in this country now. Labour's election in 1997 gave it a huge majority, but the reason it got elected was the massive collapse in the Tory vote from 1992. When Labour was re-elected in 2001, it actually got 2 million less votes than Labour got in 1992 on the massively unpopular Neil Kinnock. It isn't the question that Labour is a hugely popular party. It owes its elevated position in terms of parliamentary seats to the collapse of the Tory vote in the past. And it is now heading for that same massive massive collapse at the next election. 4, 5 or 6 million people who voted for Labour in 1997 are cast around now, either not voting for anybody or being siren votes possibly for the far right. And we've seen what happens if you don't have a political alternative for working class people when they're looking either for a protest or looking for somebody to blame. You see the difference. You look at the difference, I won't go through the figures, I haven't got time. You look at the difference between Germany and Austria. In Germany, over the last 2 or 3 years, they've built a party called Die Linke, which has got 57 MPs in Parliament. It's got the added advantage of a particularly generous form of proportional representation, which I won't go into today, but also a national figure like Oscar Lafontaine, who whatever you think, I always think of him as a bit like Robin Cook. I mean, in terms of he's nationally known, he's been a cabinet minister and so on. Once he joined Die Linke, he gave it that national viability. 57 MPs in Germany. Next door in Austria, in the general election last year, the 2 far-right parties, including the Freedom Party that used to be led by the late and unlamented Haider, got 27% of the vote between the 2 parties. In this Euro election, the votes of the far right in Germany were less than half the votes of the far right in Austria, because there was a political alternative. We're not immune to that process in this country. In a sense, we've been lucky that there hasn't been a semi-stable electoral base created for far-right right-wing populist politics in this country. It will not necessarily go on forever. So the reason I think we have to move forward much more quickly in building an alternative for working people is not just on the question of privatisation. That's important. Not just on the question of anti-trade union laws. As one speaker said this morning, if you're determined enough with Lindsay and the rest of the places, you can brush these laws out the road anyway. It's not just those issues, it's what may happen to develop in this country if the BNP and the far right over the next 5 or 10 years are able to develop the same semi-stable electoral base as Le Pen has got in France, as the Vlaams has got in Belgium, or as the right-wing parties have got in places like Austria. And I think the involvement in the No2EU campaign was worth it as a much more serious step forward. And I've got a little experience in chairing national regroupments of the left over the last 10 or 15 years. I can tell you without fear of contradiction, there was far more harmonious working relationship between the Communist Party of Britain, the Socialist Party, the Alliance for Green Socialism, Solidarity and Elements of Respect, the RMT and the others who came on board on this. And I think it bodes well for the future. If we can build from that, begin to involve a wider and a deeper layer of working class and political organisation to build up and outwards from what we've achieved so far. We could be looking at the general election. Perhaps on one side there are people saying, let's stand against every cabinet minister. That might be the minimum that's put forward as an alternative. I think you'd have to stand over 100 seats to get a TV broadcast, for example. I'd like to push the boat out at least at that level. But you can't rule out that if 1 or 2 more unions came on the board and it was seen as viable and people started getting better organised, there could be even bigger achievements we could make in the standards taking place in the general election. That depends on you. Getting the discussions going in the trade union and working class organisations, getting involved both within whatever we manage to create over the next 2 or 3 months, and as I would argue, our existing campaigns, like the campaign for the new Working Party, which we've been running now for the last 2 or 3 years. So thanks so much for listening.